So everyone, do you all remember the bicycle that I got for Lauren from Cycle Shack on Vanderbilt Beach Road? Well, she wanted to upgrade it. She was having, she loved it, but something she wanted to do a little different.
It wasn't comfortable on my bum bum.
On your bum bum.
On my bum bum.
So how do you rectify a problem with your cycle, or your bicycle, I should say?
When it's uncomfortable on your bum bum?
Exactly.
You take it to Cycle Shack and they put a new seat on your bike that's more comfortable for your bum bum.
How do you know if you like it or not? Because the original one you didn't like it.
Well, Teddy helped me out. He helped me pick what he thought would work best for me and my bum bum. So he actually didn't even charge me for it. He told me take it home, ride it around for a few days, make sure that it's what you want. And then if you like it, come back in and pay for it. If not, come back in. We'll exchange it for something else. It ended up being great. It was a Cloud 9. It's called Cloud 9. It's like my bum bum sitting on Cloud 9.
So literally riding on Cloud 9.
Exactly. So again, Cycle Shack hooks us up. They're great. If you are in the Naples area or Southwest Florida, please check them out at 7211 Vanderbilt Beach Road, Naples, Florida. Or call them at 239-331-2065.
Yeah, you don't have to buy a new bike. Maybe just an upgrade.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
I'm Lauren.
I am Ken.
And this is Paradise After Dark.
Dark.
Paradise After Dark is a bi-weekly podcast covering true crime,
unsolved mysteries,
missing people,
urban legends, and the dark side of the Sunshine State.
If you'd like to support our show and get a bunch of extra Paradise After Dark content, sign up for our Patreon at patreon.com/Paradise After Dark podcast.
Hey, everyone. Check out our brand new website we just launched.
On our website, you'll find links to all of our episodes, mailing list, our social medias, and our Patreon.
We've also integrated a store right on the site for easy grab of some Paradise After Dark gear.
Yep.
You can also, we have a virtual tip jar, and you can leave us a little tip, and we'll give you a shout out on the show.
Yeah, help us pay the bills.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's paradiseafterdark.com. Check it out. Speaking of shout outs.
Oh, also, our logo. Whole new logo coming up this year.
Oh, yes, we do have a new logo.
Check it out.
We're going to have new stickers, new gear, everything.
Check it out.
What I was going to say, speaking of shout outs, let's read one of our recent 5-star reviews.
We actually have some of those?
We do.
Ooh,
we do.
I want to hear it.
All right. So our most recent 5-star review says, I love listening to Paradise After Dark podcast at work. I just finished listening to all of the 2020 episodes and a few older episodes too. Sometimes I'll listen in my car driving home. Ken and Lauren do a great job researching cases to give their listeners as much details as possible. I was born and raised in Naples, Florida, so I enjoy all the local cases and urban legend stories. I give it 5 stars.
Aw, I'm blushing. Who's the nice person?
That's Sarah.
Sarah, thank
P.
you.
from Naples, Florida.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
I'm kind of, my cheeks are red. Can we take a break so I can feel my face getting warm? No, seriously, thank you guys very much. Thank you. So tonight we have to kind of jump in a time machine.
It's we got another case that's old and cold.
And you know what? It's not Tallahassee.
No, it's actually not in Tallahassee. One of Florida's most brutal and haunting unsolved cases occurred in Osprey, Florida, 6 days before Christmas in 1959. Christine, aka Tilly Walker, age 24, her husband, Cliff Walker, age 25, along with their children, Jimmy, 3, and Debbie, 1, were all murdered in their home on December 19, 1959. The family lived on a cattle ranch, the Palmer Ranch, where Cliff worked as a ranch hand. On the morning of December 20th, 1959, Daniel McLeod, a co-worker of Cliff's, went by the ranch to pick Cliff up. They had plans to go hog hunting that day. Pulling up to the Walkers' small home in his truck, McLeod immediately found it odd that the house was dark and relatively quiet.
That would be a little suspicious.
Well, it was like 5 o'clock in the morning.
Well, I guess that's true. And this is 59, so it's not like now where everything's lit up.
Furthermore, both Cliff's Jeep and the family car were in the yard, although the automobile wasn't in the location where it was usually parked. Assuming that Cliff had overslept, he knocked loudly on the door but got no answer. The front door was locked, and he noticed a cut tree and some Christmas gifts on the porch, which was strange. McLeod went around to the back of the house. The back screen door was latched, so he peered in through the window and was able to discern a single dim light. Someone was in there, but why was no one answering his knocks? Initially, thinking that the pilot light on the gas heater had gone out and the house had been filled with carbon monoxide, deadly fumes, and killed the family, he cut a hole in the screen with his pocket knife and unlocked the door. There he discovered the Walker family slaughtered.
Well, Christine was found in the doorway to the living room. I'm still thinking that maybe they had been killed by the carbon monoxide. McLeod ran to her thinking he could drag her outside and revive her. So obviously, if you leave the gas on, what you get is asphyxiation. So there's basically just replaces all the oxygen in the room.
Right.
And if you can get them outside, get air in them, sometimes they pass out. So obviously showing up that early in the morning, you don't know at what time this happened. So of course he's trying to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
But when he got closer, that's when he realized there was actually blood. Now, Cliff and Jimmy were in the corner of the living room. Little Jimmy curled up next to his father. Now both were covered in blood. Debbie, not even 2 years old, was nowhere to be found at this point, but was later found shot and drowned in the family bathtub. And that's not the kind of story we'd like to tell, but it's the facts in this case. Now, McLeod, of course, runs from the home and hopped into Cliff's Jeep. He drove to the IGA supermarket where there was a payphone. However, he didn't have a dime, at the luck, right?
1959.
He didn't have a dime and continued driving until he came upon a woman just opening a nearby restaurant. There was no telephone in the restaurant, but the lady gave him a dime so he could go back to the store and call the Sarasota Police Department at the payphone.
Right.
That's the struggle of the way things are. I mean, now we take things so much for granted.
Now everyone has a cell phone.
Well, even
house phone.
Well, businesses have phones. I mean, there's phones everywhere. You can't really go anywhere in public place within 15 feet of a phone.
Right.
It seems. And here's a situation where he couldn't get a payphone, then finds a lady open a restaurant. There's no phone there.
Yeah.
And then he has to go back. But with all this being said, the family had been out that day shopping and running errands. And Christine was on her own and Cliff was off with the children. Now, Christine had gone grocery shopping and Cliff had taken the children to do some Christmas shopping. Remember, this is Christmas time. And also, since he had been wanting to trade the family car in for a later model, he stopped by the car lot to see what was available. So he's taking the car down. He's going to say, hey, let's see what we got here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's believed that Christine was the first to arrive home, and that was roughly around 4 p.m. And she was, at that point, I guess, engaged with the perpetrator, the suspects.
Right.
And she was sexually assaulted and then shot in the head with a .22 caliber firearm, which is actually a brutal bullet considering it's a small caliber.
Well, a .22 is a very small bullet, but I heard recently on something I was listening to that killers prefer a .22 because it will
ricochet.
Yes, it will ricochet inside the body.
Yeah,
so even though it's a tiny bullet, it
does a lot.
Does a lot of damage. Yeah.
Well, and then imagine this. So now, obviously, like we said before, she was sexually assaulted, shot in the head, and then Cliff, he returns home a little later, and the killer or the killers were probably still in the house at this point.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, this is stuff that's ascertained through, the detective showing up and sort of telling the story. So, and of course, obviously, at this point, if the killers are still there, he sees his wife on the floor, and he's ambushed and he's shot along with little Jimmy and Debbie.
So let's rewind here a little bit and talk about Christine Walker because this is going to be important. She married Cliff when she was just 19 years old, but it was said that she wasn't very happy in her marriage. Cliff made $220 a month, just enough to cover the basics, but not much else. And obviously, Christine didn't work. She just stayed home and took care of the children. So other women in the town had nice clothes and cars, and Christine had very little, which made her feel jealous and unhappy. She envied her sister, who had married well and had more money. But in a letter written to her mother not long before the murders, Christine said that even though her sister had, quote, a lot more clothes than I have, she still hasn't got what I've got. I've got a husband and a happy home.
Ooh.
During her teenage years, Christine was said to be quite a looker, and she flaunted her figure by wearing short shorts and tight tops. She was also very flirtatious, and there were many men who wanted to marry her before she chose Cliff. Even later, some people in the town said she dressed a little too sexy for a married woman. Now remember, this is 1959.
Yeah.
Nowadays, you go into Publix and you see, a 50-year-old woman in a tube top and booty shorts, and you don't even think a second thought about it. But
and the thing is for me, when I think 1959, I can't look at a picture from 1959 that someone says is provocative and think that's provocative, but it's how the time changes. It's all relative.
So for her shopping trip that day, Christine chose a sheer red and white print dress and high heels. Her first stop was the IGA supermarket, where Christine mentioned to Thelma Tills, the store manager, that she was upset with Cliff because he had gotten into a fight on that Thursday. However, she declined to reveal the details. The day before, when her mother-in-law had stopped by for a visit, Christine told her, "Your son liked to get killed yesterday." But when she saw Cliff approaching them, she clammed up and said nothing more about the incident. So we have two people here that Christine Walker mentioned that her husband had gotten into a fight the previous Thursday. So that's one thing, just a little nugget to keep in mind.
Well, the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office was called in to investigate. That's Sarasota County. That's not where Sarasota is it?
Osprey, Florida is in Sarasota County.
And Sarasota County is Sarasota area.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I don't know why I thought it was different. Sarasota County I thought that's not Hillsborough County. That's Tampa. Don't mind me. I don't know. Apparently I don't know Florida geography.
Don't know geography.
Oh my God. You'd think I would know Florida, but here's the thing. Florida has too many counties. Okay. Too many counties.
There's a lot of counties.
A lot of counties. But the thing is, there's some places where the counties don't match necessarily the city. The city might be 100 miles away that's named that, but then this county's over here. Don't mind me. I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to Florida. Well, anyway, like I said, the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office, they come in, they're going to do the investigation. And when Sheriff Ross Boyer, who was the sheriff at the time, arrived at the Walker home that morning, his deputies were already there. So his deputies are there. The sheriff rolls up. And according to an article in the Sarasota Herald, the following day, everyone was visibly shaken by what they saw, which I think anytime you add children to a murder scene like this, that obviously is going to shake people up or cause a little bit more mental anguish, if you will. Well, and there were signs that Christine had fought hard for her life. So now you got a woman, obviously, who's sexually assaulted, and you know that she endured some of this struggle because you see signs of a fight, which, of course, that adds to, them being shaken. I don't know. To me, it just makes it
worse.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, cause she was alive during all of this, it's like, just shoot her and do what you got to do kind of thing. That would be the ideal murder scene for this situation. But anyway, well, there was blood all over the kitchen, and one of Christine's bloody high heels was found on the porch, suggesting that she had used the heel of the shoe on the assailant during the fight. So she tries to attack her assailant with the heel. Now, even though she apparently made it out of the door at one point, the killer managed to get her back inside the house, threw her onto Jimmy's bed, and shot her twice in the head before or after raping her. We're still not 100% certain on that. Now, she was obviously still fighting when she was shot because the first bullet wound was superficial. The second shot was in the top of her skull. Additionally, the killer pulled out a quilt and put it over the bloodstained pillow on Jimmy's bed and used another quilt to wipe the blood from Christine's legs before dragging her across the floor toward the living room. Why do you think that would be? Maybe they're trying to cover up the tracks?
I don't know why
It's hard to tell.
I can't really, I don't know. It appeared as if Cliff was taken out immediately when he entered the home with a gunshot right between the eyes. Little Jimmy was shot 3 times in the head. By the way the scene looked, it appears as if the first shot to Jimmy's head didn't kill him, and he crawled to his father's side before being shot twice more.
Wow.
Sheriff Boyer surmised that the perpetrator used the last bullet on 1-year-old Debbie, and when she didn't die immediately, took her to the bathroom, used a sock to block the drain, ran about 4 inches of water so that he could hold her face down in the tub until she went limp.
The physical evidence that was left at the scene included a bloody cowboy boot, a cellophane strip from a cool cigarette wrapper, and a fingerprint on the bathtub faucet handle.
That's a KOOL cigarette wrapper, not like cigarettes are cool or anything.
Yeah, right. Well, I think most people I guess, the thing is back then in 59, you didn't have all the cigarettes that there were. I mean, you had select few.
Yeah, so that's true, I guess.
In 1959, the fact that it was a cool cigarette would have been significant because you had a population that smoked Camels, Lucky Strike, Cools. I mean, there was not I guess maybe there were, but there wasn't basic 305s, generics, and all these other natural cigarettes. #natural nothing. But anyway, a walkthrough of the house revealed that some key items were missing from the home. Now, this is where things get a little tricky.
Yeah, it's a little weird.
Exactly, because it's not your normal stuff.
It's not like a normal burglary of a home.
Assuming that this was a burglary, right? Cliff's pocket knife was missing. Okay, that doesn't make any sense. Okay, maybe you take a pocket knife. Hey, it's a great knife. Okay, I can understand that, but it wouldn't seem like the right thing to take to me personally. Christine's high school majorette uniform. Really?
That's weird.
Okay, now to me, I would instantly think as a detective, had it been a female, maybe she liked the look of it. She tried it on, it fit. That's where I would have thought. Okay, but I'm just saying that's where my mind went when looking into this.
That's not where my mind went.
Okay, well, what would your mind go?
That it was some perv.
I'm just saying at a first glance. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. Well, at my first glance, the fact that her high school majorette uniform, which a majorette uniform is kind of like
a cheerleading uniform?
There's not cheerleaders, but it's like, how nowadays they have like flag girls and, something like that. But to take that comes to me as some sort of like perversion, something along those lines.
And it's funny because that's good because now I would think as a detective, hey, maybe the perpetrator brought a female with him and she liked this uniform and stole it. And I guess my mind, because we've done so much with the Sims case that we know that there were a male and a female in that case. We already know who it was.
Yes, we do.
#maybe. Sorry. Okay, now here's where it gets really, really weird. The most interesting thing that was missing was the couple's marriage license.
Which was framed on the wall in the home.
Okay, now, why would that be missing?
The only thing taken from the home was Cliff's pocket knife, Christine's high school majorette uniform, and the couple's marriage license.
Well, based on the missing items, investigators did theorize that the Walker's killers must have known the couple and was maybe even in love with or maybe had some infatuation with Christine. Now, given that she was sexually assaulted and actually was the first to be murdered.
So the first to be suspected was obviously Daniel McLeod, the man who discovered the bodies. But he passed a polygraph and was quickly ruled out. Albert Walker, a cousin of Cliff's with a violent streak, was the next person they looked at. When he attended the funeral of his cousin and his family, Albert Walker wailed and became so distraught he fainted twice. Family members were sure he was faking his grief, and described him as wild and a man who got rowdy and belligerent when drinking.
So you think that they felt that maybe, because obviously his family would know him, that maybe that this was a bit embellished a little bit?
Well, his family thought that he was faking his grief.
Well, that's what I'm saying is obviously they know him well enough to know that maybe this is not how he would have normally reacted.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Cliff's brother told investigators that Albert was, quote, the type of person who would commit a crime of this nature. Albert was investigated and questioned at length, and when he was strapped to the polygraph machine, he passed. However, in 1987, Lieutenant Max Skeens, a polygraph expert, declared old polygraph results were essentially worthless. But in 2006, Albert Walker submitted a sample for DNA testing, and his DNA did not match that in the semen stain that was found on Christine Walker's panties.
Okay. So this Max Skeens guy says he's a polygraph expert, says declared old polygraph results were essentially worthless.
Yes.
Now, mind you, the technology from 59 to 87 was virtually the same. I mean, they hook you up to sensors. They check for sweat. They check for heart rate, pulse. It's the same stuff. So from 59 to 87, there really wasn't any difference. The only thing that was different was they were starting to apply computer analysts, which actually took the information and created an algorithm to say, hey, this leans more this way or that way. So I don't get it. I mean, I don't understand. So when he says he kind of lied on the polygraph, I don't necessarily feel that way. And because, well, maybe I'll save that for later when we get into maybe who we feel like is more responsible.
Okay.
We'll hold that. Just hold that thought.
Okay.
Because we do have a gentleman named Wilbur Tooker. Now, he was a 65-year-old retired railroad worker. You don't think of railroad workers much anymore, but
I've been working on the railroad.
Now, he lived approximately a mile southwest of the Walker home, and he was actually the family's closest neighbor. I mean, because remember, it's 59, it's kind of countryside.
Yeah.
Well,
farms.
Exactly. And Christine's mother had told investigators that her daughter dreaded Tooker's visits and once confided to her sister that the only way to stop the dirty old man was with a bullet. And apparently the man had attempted to kiss Christine at one point and actually propositioned her for more than that, maybe more than once.
Yeah.
So now this prompted Cliff to threaten to kill Tooker. So he says, hey, I'm warning you, you come around the house again, you will be sorry. And Tooker had an airtight alibi, though. But Tooker, of course, has an airtight alibi for the afternoon and the evening of December 19th. So investigators rule him out.
At one point, serial killer Emmett Monroe Spencer confessed to the crime in a letter that proved to be, quote, cleverly constructed from real murders written up in newspapers and true crime novels that he liked to read, according to an article on investigationdiscovery.com.
I don't understand that. Why would someone want
falsely confess?
You know what? I shouldn't be asking that question. That makes me sound really dumb. I get it now. Because it's like, I want more notoriety than I got.
Yeah.
I want people talking about me again. And that's one thing that you find too, I guess, with serial killers and murderers is if something's hot and in the news, and at this time it obviously would have been big, of course, be like, ooh, I want to take credit for that. I want my name in the paper again to be more relevant.
Right. Because
if you're already in prison, what difference does it make anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now at this point, investigators are working frantically to find the culprits, which is what you want to do, because if you're in a community and this type of stuff happens, and it's not just someone got murdered, it's an entire family that got murdered, and it's heinous in the aspect of what had happened to the youngest 1-year-old child that's shot and then, of course, drowned later on. Now, ultimately, they interviewed 587 potential suspects and or witnesses, if you want to call them that, only to have the case go cold on them. So now they do all this work, all this investigation, all of these interrogations, all these talks, all these notes, investigating everything I can do, and nothing. And the case stays stagnant for 60 years until 2007, when Sarasota County Sheriff's Detective Kimberly McGath reopened the file and worked for the next 5 years to connect the killings to Perry Smith and Dick Hickok, who it turned out had been among the original suspects back in 1960. Which, this is not the first time we've heard this, where let's go back to some of the stuff that we've seen and, maybe the detectives didn't realize.
So who are Perry Smith and Dick Hickok, you may ask?
I do ask, Lauren.
And I think some of our listeners might know already, maybe not. But Smith and Hickok had been convicted and executed for the 1959 murders of the Clutter family in Holcomb, Kansas.
Holcomb, that's an awful long way.
Smith and Hickok were recently paroled from the Kansas State Penitentiary. Now, a former cellmate of Hickok's, Floyd Wells, had been a farmhand for Herb Cutter, the patriarch of the Clutter family.
There you go.
Wells told Hickok that Clutter kept a large amount of cash in a safe in their home. After learning this information, Hickok hatched a plan to steal the safe and start a new life in Mexico. So Hickok contacted Smith, who was another former cellmate, about committing the robbery with him. On the evening of November 14th, 1959, now this is about 5 to 6 weeks before the Walker murder, Hickok and Smith drove more than 400 miles across the state of Kansas to the Clutter residence to execute their plan. When they arrived at the Clutter home in the middle of the night, they entered through an unlocked door. Side note, always lock your doors.
It's a good idea.
They woke the family, tied them up, and searched for the safe. Upon realizing that there was no safe, and the Clutter family did all their business using checks, not cash, Smith, notoriously unstable and prone to violent acts and fits of rage, slit Herb Cutter's throat and then shot him in the head. Kenyon, Nancy, and Bonnie Clutter were then each murdered by a single shotgun blast to the head. Now, it is also said that Smith prevented Hickok from raping Nancy Clutter.
So Smith stopped him.
Yes, apparently Hickok wanted to rape Nancy Clutter, who was the mother, and Perry Smith stopped him.
It never occurred, so therefore this is obviously just what's been said or told.
Right.
Okay.
So Smith and Hickok were the subject of Truman Capote's book, In Cold Blood, believed to be the first real true crime novel.
You should probably read that.
I have read it.
I figured it
Of course I've read it.
I think everyone listening has read it.
Hopefully.
If not.
And if you haven't, please read it.
Recommend a reading.
It's a great book. I don't want to say it's a great book, but it is truly like the first true crime novel ever written. So Truman Capote learned of the quadruple murder before the killers were captured, and he traveled to Kansas to write about the crime. He was accompanied by his childhood friend and fellow author Harper Lee. Now, Harper Lee is the author of To Kill a Mockingbird.
That is an excellent book.
They interviewed residents and investigators assigned to the case and took thousands of pages of notes. In Cold Blood was an instant success and is the second best-selling true crime book in history behind Vincent Bugliosi's Helter Skelter about the Charles Manson murders. There's a movie about Truman Capote and his writing of the book. It was titled Capote and was released in 2005. Capote grossed $28.8 million in the United States and won several awards.
In 2005, that was big money. Big money in 2005. Okay, so here's where things start to kind of tie a little bit.
Right.
So the Clutter family case bore eerie similarities to the Walker family case. Now, both were quadruple homicides with both parents and 2 children slaughtered. And also, Christine was raped, and like we mentioned earlier, or Lauren mentioned rather, there was a rape element in the Clutter case where he was prevented from raping because he wanted to do so.
Right.
And that's where Hickok was trying to rape Nancy, but Perry said, no, it's not happening. Stopped it. Now, following the Kansas massacre, Smith and Hickok had stolen a Chevrolet Bel Air and hightailed it to Florida. So now we know that we've got the transition from Kansas to Florida. Now, that's a pretty good ride. And of course, there's obviously ample amount of time for them to get there because
about 5 to 6 weeks later.
Exactly. Because on the morning of the Walker murders, the duo actually checked out of a Miami Beach hotel. And later that day, they shopped in a store in Sarasota. And this is only several miles away from the crime scene. So they were in the area. I mean, they've gone from Kansas. And of course, if you commit a crime like that, now, and you hear this in a lot of the older cases, where the crime is committed in an area. And then, of course, the assailants want to get as far away as possible.
Right.
Now it seems like everybody draws back in. They want to stay close to it to see where investigators go, to see what the media attention. Back then, these guys were committing these crimes and they would get as far away from it as possible, which Florida's is about as far away as you can get from Kansas.
Yeah.
So they were in the area. So the possibility of this sort of coming into play.
Well, and the fact that they were pinpointed to be shopping in a store in Sarasota, which is right next to Osprey. Osprey is a small town. Like Sarasota's would be considered like the large city. And then Osprey would be, the small town outside of a large city. So they were in that area on the day that the Walker family was murdered.
And once they were murdered, then of course they haul ass again because
on December 30th, 1959, cops picked up Smith and Hickok in Las Vegas for the Clutter killings. Reportedly, they passed a polygraph exam in regard to the Walker murders, so police didn't pursue it further at that time.
Polygraphs are shit. I'm just going to put that out there.
I think polygraphs are still shit, but
whether it's 59 or 2021, polygraphs are shit.
But in police reports, there are statements that the Walker family had been in the market for a Chevy Bel Air.
Ooh.
The same car that Smith and Hickok were driving. So there is a theory that Christine had let the men inside the home thinking they were there to show her and her husband the car.
Which makes sense because the husband was out looking at the car that day.
He was out at the car lot.
Maybe okay, so take this and show my wife and then come back.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense. I didn't pick up on that.
So Hickok and Smith confessed to the murders of the Clutter family, for which they were hanged in April of 1965, but always denied the killing of the Walker family. Now, Truman Capote dedicated several pages in his book to the theory that Smith and Hickok may be responsible for the Walker murders, but concluded that he didn't think they were responsible because they had alibis. But despite what Capote asserted at the time, subsequent investigations have since revealed holes in Hickok and Smith's alibis, and some experts have asserted that polygraph tests of the era were notoriously unreliable.
Yeah, well, I mean,
that's like a common theme here in this.
Well, here's the issue you have is because you go back to where polygraph were sort of invented and now they've started to progress. So in 1959, the progression of the polygraph test had sort of, I don't want to say taken the crime world by storm because that's the wrong term, but it was becoming more of an investigative tool. So you're a detective. What else do you have? I mean, you go back to 1959, you've got a crime scene, so you've got fingerprints. Remember, and that's one of the things that I don't want to say I really like about these old cases, because obviously some of the older cases seem to be more heinous than some of the stuff that you see today, where today it's like a kill and go. Where there, it just, I don't know, for some reason, older cases like that, when there's murder, it always, to me, because it seems like there's always a lot of kids involved in some of the really old murder cases. I mean, you go like the Sims case, this case, Clutter family case. What was the other one that was associated with the Sims family murders? The
Bricka family in Ohio.
Thank you. Which was a family.
Yep.
So I think the polygraph was a good investigative tool for them to sort of get some idea. And I think that's because it was sort of pushed on people. It was still in its infancy to some extent. I mean, it was 60, 70 years old at this point. But the technology was sort of grown to what it is. And I think that's why they lean on so much on the polygraph, because they're like, he passed the polygraph, no problem. But what else did you have other than, I mean, you didn't have the forensics that you have today. You didn't have the computer technology, the DNA, the fingerprints. Yeah, you had fingerprints, but the fingerprint stuff, if you go back to the 60s, they would take a fingerprint and they would literally lay it on top of there and they would match lines. And I mean, there would be a guy physically looking at it. Now they enter it into the computer, and within a matter of, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes, not even, you can run it through a database of fingerprints. You can see ridges and lines, but back then in 59, so even if you had the polygraph, because remember, they were picked up in Vegas it was December 30th, and this happened before Christmas.
December 19th.
Exactly. So, I mean, we're not talking about a lot of time, and understand this is 1959, and again, small town USA at this point. The forensics have come so far, and I guess that's why I'm so frustrated about the polygraph use. But I guess, again, you have to consider 59 just an investigative tool. I don't know. Right. I just get really frustrated about polygraphs and lie detectors. Anyway. Yeah. So, okay. Now let's get back to the case here, because Ken's going off in this polygraph.
Are you off your soapbox?
I am. I mean, okay. if you really want to impress me, then pass a computer voice stress analyzer. That's what you want to do. Okay. So on December of 2012, the state of Florida exhumed the bodies of Perry Smith and Dick Hickok. Now, they did this to collect the DNA for testing against the evidence in the Walker case, which is probably not a bad idea, because if you think about it, you got these people that killed this family, the Clutter family. Mm-hmm. Let's go ahead and collect their DNA. So that way, over time, if any of these cases, you see these cases 20, 30 years old, if these cases start to come up and you got DNA, you can go and utilize their DNA. Now it's part of the database that they can utilize. Say, hey, holy crap, we found out that this connects to this family. Wow, somewhere between Florida and Kansas. Well, now you know. I mean, you sort of build tracks. So I like this concept, which it's weird that they would do that for such an old cold case, but I'm impressed with the way that they handled this. Now, however, in this particular case, so much time had passed that the gathered samples turned out to be weak, and they did prove inconclusive, but they're still there. They have something, but it's just not it's not an exact match.
And that was 2012. And even from 2012 to now, the strides that they've made with DNA technology, if they still have those samples somewhere, stored somewhere, who knows?
Exactly.
They may be able to do something.
That's what I'm saying. If you've got these people that you can put them in the database, let's get them locked up, or locked in, I should say, rather.
So although most people now believe it was Smith and Hickok who killed the Walkers, let's just take a look at some other ideas.
What other ideas are there, Lauren?
So as I mentioned earlier, Christine had mentioned to two different people, Thelma Tills, the store manager at the IGA, and her mother-in-law, that Cliff had gotten into a fight a few days before the murders. We still don't know who he fought or why, but what if someone was angry with him and or seeking revenge?
Makes sense.
I mean,
if it was literally a physical confrontation to where there's some pushing or shoving, where maybe it,
yeah.
Obviously, they say fight, so I'm assuming that it wasn't just a verbal argument.
And she did tell her mother-in-law, what she said to her mother-in-law was, your son liked to about get himself killed the other day.
Exactly.
So it seems like it may have been a little bit more serious than just a
Why do we see this? Why do we see this in so many cases?
What?
Where it seems like there's always that little, well, this guy got into this confrontation, this guy, I mean, now I understand it, because I almost get in a fight with 5 people in a car. They don't know that they almost got in a fight. I know that we almost got in a fight. The guy next to me in the car or cuts me off. We're about to fight. He don't know it. But you see in these cases that, it's like, well, this could have been this or this. I don't know. It seems to veer away from my brain sometimes. And I'm like, okay, well, let's focus on Smith and Hickok. But then again, you have to expand and go to all the avenues. So like a few months after the murders, 3 women discovered some bloody clothing, including 2 shirts, a skirt and a blouse, pants, and a handkerchief. Now, this is in a shed near the Walker home, and the items actually belonged to Cliff and Christine Walker, and it was assumed that the killer used the clothing to wipe the blood off himself. So you would assume maybe he wiping his hands, or
I guess.
His clothes or whatever. And the fact that the articles of the clothing were found in a location near the scene, this kind of bolstered the suspicion that the perpetrator was someone familiar with the area, more along the lines of a local man, going back into what you said, which would be someone maybe they fought,
right,
or maybe back into Tooker, who was the dirty old man we spoke about earlier.
Right. So another reason some suspected a local killer was because he murdered the 2 young children. So at ages 1 and 3, in all probability, the toddlers would not have been able to identify a stranger. Thus, there would have been no reason to kill them. However, there was a possibility that Jimmy, who had just turned 3 the previous August, he could talk, and he would have been capable of revealing the identity of a man that he knew, that he already knew.
You know what? I'm glad you brought that up because I honestly didn't think of that.
Right. Well, I mean,
that's a good point because if he's a local person
and the little boy knew him and had seen him before and he could talk, he could have identified him.
Yeah. Small town USA. I mean, I say it all the time in these situations, that's a good point because if Jimmy, and I remember when I was a kid and that goes back to the 70s, all of our friends, there was Uncle so-and-so or Uncle so-and-so. They weren't uncles. We just called them that because they were constantly over the house.
Yeah.
So this could have been Uncle Tooker because the guy said, hey, if you come, and of course, Cliff said, if you come over the house again, you're done for. That would have made sense to me. So that's a good concept. But again, if it was Smith and Hickok, if they obviously killed a family prior, so killing the family would make sense.
Well, in the Clutter murders, the children were teenagers.
Okay.
I don't think that I mentioned that earlier.
See, I didn't catch that.
The children were teenagers, not, I think Kenyon may have even been closer to 19 or 20 years old. And then the daughter, the name escapes me right now, but, she was like 16, 17.
Okay. That makes sense to me. I mean, but you're right. At 3 years old, I can remember 2 things. I'm not going to tell you what they were, but 2 things I remember when I was 3 years old. And that's about it. But if something so traumatic would have happened, such as witnessing a murder of your family, the person that's there, it would make sense that over time, maybe that memory would be so relevant in their mind that as they got older, they could have witnessed it. So it could have been somebody local. Well, and speaking of local, there's also these local rumors that Christine was actually having an affair on Cliff. She's having an affair with a man named Curtis McCall. Now, McCall's cousin, Harlan McCall, told the sheriff that he knew for a fact that Curtis and Christine were actually having this affair. And McCall was known as a violent man. He's kind of prone to troublemaking. He owned a .22 caliber handgun, which was obviously the weapon of choice in this particular murder. Now, in question, actually by Sheriff Boyer, Curtis McCall denied ever dating Christine Walker before or after her marriage and claimed that he sold his .22 handgun, but he couldn't remember who he sold it to. Okay. Suspicious?
Was he drunk?
Maybe a little. Well, maybe he sold a bunch of guns. Maybe he had a bunch of .22s. Maybe he couldn't remember the people's name. Maybe it was a stranger. I was going to say Craigslist, but it's 1959. So it could have just been a guy named Craig who wasn't on his list. No, seriousness. Now, he was actually polygraphed twice, but both times he was so nervous that the tests were deemed inconclusive. You remember, if you have base questions, so you have these base questions and you can actually fool a polygraph test. And actually, as a matter of fact, speaking of which, there was actually a former polygraph examiner, Oklahoma City detective. His name was Sergeant Doug Williams. He was sentenced for 2 years in prison by the federal government in 2015 for, quote, activities associated with teaching people how to beat a polygraph. So he actually went to prison for 2 years for teaching people how to beat a polygraph, and he was a polygraph examiner.
Wow.
So
I've never heard of that.
A polygraph can be beat. Google it, Detective Sergeant Doug Williams.
Doug Williams.
And we're not talking about the quarterback who led the Washington football team, formerly known as the Washington Redskins, to the Super Bowl to crush Denver and win a Super Bowl championship. As a matter of fact, I think that might be the last one, but we won't talk about that. Now, however, there were strong indications in this polygraph that he was lying, because when he was asked, have you withheld any information from law enforcement officers about the Walker murders? There was kind of some wishy-washy stuff there. So the polygraph kind of did lean that way a little bit. But of course, he's so nervous. What are you going to do?
Right.
But again, the nervous part is what you need to do. You got to be nervous when they're asking you your base questions. So that way, when you're nervous during the actual
Don't be telling people how to trick a polygraph. You might go to prison.
I could go to prison for 2 years, like Doug Williams.
So in 2005, the sheriff's office took a fresh look at the case and for the first time obtained DNA samples from Christine Walker's clothing.
Finally.
It is unclear if McCall's DNA has ever been examined and compared to the DNA found at the scene. An anonymous woman called the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office on August 5th, 1994. She said that she was a bartender in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, and one of her regular customers confessed to her on August 4th, 1994, that he killed a family named Walker many years ago in Osprey, Florida, when he was a young man. She said she had been talking to the man and he started crying. When she asked him why he was crying, he told her about the murders. The bartender told police the man was a white man in his 60s. She believed he was retired and worked odd jobs in the Stroudsburg area. She also believed he was a gun buff. She hung up without identifying herself and said she would call back with more information, but she never called back.
Well, actually, in 2013, the Sarasota Sheriff County announced that they were unable to find any match in the DNA, like Lauren said. And the only partial DNA that could be retrieved, possibly due to degradation of the DNA samples over the decades of contamination and storage, this kind of made the outcome one of uncertainty, of course. Consequently, investigators have stated that Smith and Hickok still remain the most viable suspects in this case. However, based on personal items that were stolen, Catherine Ramsland, now she's from the University of Pennsylvania, finds Smith and Hickok kind of unlikely in not to be the suspects, and that they really believe that the killer knew the Walker family. And the Walker's marriage certificate, which was reported stolen, actually turned up among items that were given back to the Cliff Walker's niece by a relative.
Huh. Really?
Yeah. So
by a relative.
Somehow.
Could it have been his crazy cousin?
The certificate that was missing. But here's the question that I have when it comes to that thought. Because, I mean, to this day, obviously, the Walker family murder still remains unsolved. It's going to be an unsolved case. This, unfortunately, doesn't look like one that could be solved because there's speculation so much. And if, in fact, it were Hickok and Smith, we don't know because they've already been put to death.
Right.
And again, that's another thing that we'll get into maybe on a Patreon episode at some point. So, is the marriage certificate that's hanging on the wall, was it stolen during the murders? Or maybe it had been taken previously? Or maybe it wasn't even there. How do they know that was there?
I don't know. Through my research, there was never any sort of explanation on how they knew that these items were stolen. I'm assuming maybe that it, like when something happens, I know, for example, my parents' home was burglarized several years ago, and they had to go walk through the house and tell them like what was taken. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering if maybe they brought in a close family member or somebody that said, hey, their marriage license is usually framed here on this wall, or Christine kept her majorette uniform in this drawer and it's gone, or, the pocket knife is always on the dresser and it's gone.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that's how they know the things were stolen, but the things that were stolen, I think they point to something.
They point to more of a family member, maybe
of someone closer to the family than Perry, maybe Smith, and Hickok.
Well, they could be the most, you never heard of, no one that listens to podcasts, especially true crime podcasts, have ever heard the term. No one's ever heard of the wrong place at the wrong time. So maybe they kill the Clutter family in Kansas. They haul ass to Florida. Let the investigation occur. Now they're headed back and they take off and they're caught in Vegas, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now we know that they were in Florida. They go back to Vegas because they want to get as far away as possible, but then they don't want to go back to Kansas, so they go to Vegas, which I think they were more around that area anyway originally. But the fact that something that was said to be missing from the case, like the marriage certificate, because, whatever reason it's missing and they can determine that it was missing. Maybe it was turned up by a family member, maybe somebody who was overreacting at a funeral, grieving a little bit.
Yeah, that's interesting. I did not know that it was later found and given back to a family member. It was
given back to family, along with some other items too. There was, that was one of the items reported stolen that was given to him, but there was other items that were returned to him. And of course, it happened to be in there. So, again, this is a case that is obviously it's a very old and cold, as Lauren calls them. It may have been solved. Maybe the detectives were onto something, but the part I hate about unsolved cases, and one of the reasons, we get the unsolved and we want to put that out there, is it's like the speculations there of, okay, well, it could have been Hickok and Smith. Maybe it was a family member. Maybe it was somebody just random, but the wrong place, wrong time. So Hickok and Smith, they're there and they're just trying to get away from what happened in Kansas. And somehow they end up in the wrong town. This happens. Kind of like if you go back to the Sims case. Remember was it the fair that was in town?
Yes.
Yeah, the fair was in town.
The fair was in town.
So there was some suspect that, okay, it could have been that. Maybe it was somebody in the fair that happened to see her there that week. That you just don't know. So there always seems to be that one little element in true crime. And I think that's what's so intriguing about true crime, is that there's always that little element of it could have been. And in this case, that's kind of where I'm going to lean to. I know Lauren kind of leans towards the Smith and Hickok aspect, right?
Well, I really don't lean any direction. I am honestly on this case. I just have to say, I don't know.
Yeah, I like it. I do kind of lean more towards a family member. I do.
Could have been, yeah.
And I think I kind of felt that way, but then you sort of re-emphasized it to me when you're talking about the could have witnessed or could have recognized.
Right.
And of course, a stranger or a local in town, a 3-year-old, maybe wouldn't recognize. A family member? Oh yeah, that's Uncle so-and-so. Right. That's Aunt so-and-so. That's great. So that would make more sense to me. So again, this is another one of those unsolved cases that, if you've heard a story from a family member, if you know somebody here that's told you this story prior to us, because until this was looked into by Paradise After Dark, I never heard of this case.
Yeah.
So
this case is not super,
well known.
No.
Yeah.
It's not.
So that's one of those things where if you've heard a story about the Walker family murders in Sarasota, pick up the phone, tell somebody, hey, this is my story, whether they believe you or whatever. You never know where that kind of stuff could lead.
Exactly.
So our rule of thumb is always, if you
see something,
say something. That's it. So, well, that's the story tonight for the Walker family murders. And like I said, to this day, the Walker family murder still remains unsolved. So here we are. All
right. Again, if you'd like to support the show, please subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/Paradise After Dark podcast.
And please, please, please check out our website for all those links to our social media. Scroll to the bottom. They'll be there. There's Patreon. There's all of our new TikTok that Lauren's been doing, which is actually pretty good TikTok. She does some good stuff. Lauren does good work. I'm glad she's finally stepping up to want to help out the podcast a little bit.
Oh my gosh.
I'm just teasing. And remember, the merch store is there. It's right there. You click store, boom, you can buy some really cool stuff. We've got a bunch of new stuff that's going to be heading in there to the store. So please, if nothing else, just come check out our website, look at it, and hit us up with a message. Let us know what you think.
Make sure to subscribe to the show on whatever platform you're listening and rate and review. This really helps us branch out and reach a wider audience.
And maybe we'll read your review.
If you give us a good review, we're going to start reading one each episode. We're going to read a review. So
yeah, please. And as always, thanks for listening
to Paradise After Dark.
Dark.